"You'll ride with me now," his voice cut through the air. These weren't words of invitation or inquiry, but a declaration as immovable as the stone ridges stretching toward the endless sky. Red earth covered everything in sight, powdery layers settling on weathered boot leather, coating his reliable mount's sides, and dusting the bare flesh of the trembling woman beneath the merciless desert. Her deceased husband's relatives, 3 harsh men, lingered by their cart, wearing expressions of cruel triumph mixed with contempt. Their final act of retribution was complete. A public ceremony of dispossession that stripped away not just her dwelling and identity, but her very honor, abandoning her empty-handed at the edge of unfamiliar territory. The eldest among them, bearing a severe, narrow face with eyes like stone fragments, ejected saliva onto the ground. "She belongs to our family now." "This ain't your concern, Abel." Abel's attention remained fixed on the woman. He noticed the quiver running through her frame, how her gaze locked onto some distant horizon, refusing to acknowledge either her tormentors or her unexpected savior. In one smooth motion, he dismounted, each movement calculated and purposeful. From behind his saddle, he untied a heavy woolen covering and approached her. The air between them crackled with a silence that overwhelmed even the desert wind. Without another word, he draped the thick material around her shoulders, ensuring his hands never made contact with her skin, an act of deep, impersonal dignity. Then he pivoted toward the men, his demeanor unchanged, as calm and intimidating as frozen water. "Leave my property now." Their return journey unfolded as a wordless march beneath an indifferent expanse of sky. The woman Lena sat curled before him on the horse, rough wool providing harsh comfort against her skin. Behind her, she sensed the steady barrier of his chest, a constant, non-threatening presence that demanded nothing from her. She concentrated on the horse's steady gait, leather-creaking hooves striking the parched ground in rhythm. Every stride carried her further from the existence that had crumbled piece by piece before shattering in one final, vicious blow. Wind murmured through the scrub brush, carrying scents of dust and approaching rain. Abel maintained a stillness that seemed woven into the landscape itself, his gaze sweeping across rolling terrain and shadowed ravines with instinctive watchfulness. He offered no words, no empty comfort, no questions she couldn't answer. His quiet became her sanctuary, a space where she could slowly collect her scattered pieces without pressure to explain or perform. The sun started its gradual fall, brushing western clouds with harsh streaks of amber and scarlet colors resembling fresh injuries. Light revealed the angular planes of his face, showing a chart of sun damage and hardship carved around his eyes. He was crafted from the same harsh substance as the land he cultivated. Still, a quiet honor emanated from his bearing, a guarantee of protection she hadn't experienced in years. When the first stars punctured the darkening twilight, a distant lantern's weak glow emerged, a tiny beacon of warmth in the vast encroaching darkness. It marked their first glimpse of a destination. Somewhere she was being brought rather than choosing. And fear, cold and piercing, momentarily returned. His homestead nestled in a small sheltered valley, a cluster of robust plain structures that appeared to have sprouted from the earth naturally. A humble dwelling, a solid stable, and a network of barriers stood against the advancing wilderness, evidence of relentless work and silent perseverance. He guided the horse to water, slipped from the saddle, then lifted his arms toward her. His hands were rough and confident as they encircled her middle, bringing her safely to ground. Her legs threatened to buckle momentarily, and he steadied her wordlessly, maintaining his grip until she regained stability. The interior was minimal and spotless. A stone hearth commanded one wall, its opening swept clean. Handcrafted furniture showed the smooth wear of constant use. Subtle aromas of wood smoke, coffee, and aged leather filled the air. He gestured toward a closed entrance. "That space belongs to you." Clothing waits on the bed, "They belong to my mother." He moved toward the cooking area, his actions practical, his attention already shifting to the next essential task. He kindled a flame, crackling and flaring kindling, filling the peaceful room with sudden, welcoming vitality. Lena entered the room to discover a plain cotton gown and a faded undergarment spread across the covering of a narrow bed. They were clean and carried the scent of lye soap and sunlight. She abandoned the heavy blanket, the final reminder of her degradation, and clothed herself in the borrowed garments. They fit loosely on her thin frame, but they served as armor, a fresh start. Upon her return, he had prepared 2 servings of beans and pork on the simple wooden surface. They consumed their meal in silence, hearing only the scraping of utensils against metal plates and the gentle whisper of flames. She observed him, this reserved, steer man who had intervened with the power of nature's law. He ate with the same concentrated purpose he brought to all tasks. His attention focused downward. He requested nothing from her, not even her identity. It was a kindness she hadn't realized she required. The initial days flowed in a slow, wordless pattern governed by sunrise and the land's demands. Abel woke before dawn, his soft footsteps on wooden planks serving as the only alarm. He would disappear for hours, caring for his small herd, repairing boundaries, existing in perpetual, meaningful movement. He left meals for her on the table bread, a bowl of soup without fanfare. He never invaded her privacy, never knocked at her door. He provided space, as if it were something tangible, medicine for an invisible injury he recognized but couldn't see. Lena stayed within the house walls, a pale spirit haunting the margins of his existence. She investigated the compact space, her bare feet soundless on cool wooden floors. The dwelling reflected its owner. Everything served a function. Nothing was excessive in her acclaimed room. She discovered a small wooden container holding precious items, carved wooden birds, a worn photograph of a stern woman sharing Abel's eyes, and a single chipped china cup with its delicate handle missing. She cradled the fragile vessel in her palms, its brokenness providing strange comfort. Like her, it was damaged, yet remained beautiful. One afternoon, needing fresher air that felt dense and stifling, she stepped onto the veranda. Sunlight blazed, the atmosphere sharp and pure. In the distance, Abel worked alone, repairing fence sections, his hammer's rhythmic strikes creating a steady pulse against the enormous silence. He didn't turn or acknowledge her, but she noticed his movements pause briefly. Tiny hesitation confirming he sensed her watching presence. It marked the first time she had voluntarily emerged to face the world, and he honored her by not making it a display. A week following her arrival, she spotted it at dark, on the far eastern ridge, where no rider belonged. Too distant for details, yet she knew with bone-deep certainty who it was. The Graysons were watching. The figure remained nearly an hour, a silent, threatening guard, before vanishing beyond the rise. A chill, unrelated to the day's warmth, traced her spine. The valley no longer felt protective, but imprisoning. She retreated inside, the walls suddenly seeming fragile and inadequate. That evening, Abel returned from his work without immediately beginning dinner preparations. Instead, he spread oiled cloth across the table and carefully began dismantling his rifle. He worked beneath the lantern's quiet hiss, large hands moving with practiced, unsettling precision. He cleaned each component methodically, metallic sounds echoing through the small space. He never mentioned the Ridge Rider, never acknowledged the threat now suspended between them, but his actions spoke volumes. Lena occupied a chair near the hearth, observing him, her hands clasped tightly. The weapon's methodical cleaning wasn't aggression, but sober readiness, acknowledgement of the world beyond their peaceful valley. A world that hadn't forgotten her. She understood then that his protection wasn't momentary charity, but a responsibility he had accepted and wouldn't abandon easily. The atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken awareness. Shared knowledge of danger waiting beyond the horizon. One night, a ew's sharp, distressed cries woke the homestead. A storm approached from the north, wind howling around the house corners. Abel was already donning boots, grabbing a lantern as he headed outside. Driven by unexplained instinct, Lena followed him into the churning darkness, in the small birthing enclosure near the barn. A way struggled with a breached lamb barely breathing. Wind threatened to extinguish their fragile light. Abel worked with calm urgency, his hands gentle, yet firm as he repositioned the lamb. "Take this," he commanded, his voice tight, nodding toward the lantern. "Keep it steady." Lena grasped it, her hands surprisingly solid as she held the warm glass, angling light so he could see. She knelt in dirt and straw, wind tearing at her hair, holding the beam unwavering. Time seemed frozen, marked only by the EU's labored breathing and Abel's low, soothing murmurs. Finally, with great effort, the lamb emerged, slick and motionless. For a heart-stopping moment, it didn't stir. Abel cleared its airway and rubbed its small body vigorously with burlap. Then a tremor, a weak cry. It lived. Profound relief, almost painful in its intensity, washed over Lena. Together, they had preserved life. As Abel settled the lamb with its mother, he glanced at Lena, still holding the lantern. His express. One evening by the fire, she finally revealed her story. Her voice remained low and steady, stating facts rather than seeking sympathy. She described her husband kind, but weakened his fever death. She explained how his family, the Graysons, saw her as merely a failed investment, another burden, a woman who had produced no heir. They seized the farm, livestock, and when they decided to banish her, took her clothing as a final bitter lesson in ownership. Abel listened without interruption. Hands resting on his knees, gaze fixed on dancing flames. His only reaction was a muscle clenching and unclenching in his jaw, small, hard knot of controlled rage. When she finished, profound quiet settled over the room. But it was a piece of shared knowledge, a burden finally witnessed and set down. The sky had remained bruised purple all day, air heavy and electric with approaching storm. Cattle grew restless, lowing nervously in the pasture. Abel was reinforcing the barn door when he saw them, 3 riders cresting the familiar eastern ridge. No longer distant specks, but clear. Determined figures moving with grim purpose. He straightened, wiping hands on his pants, face becoming stone. He walked to the house, stride unhurried. Lena stood on the porch, hands gripping the railing, knuckles white. She had seen them too. "Get inside," he said, voice quiet but absolute. She hesitated, eyes wide with familiar terror. "Get inside," he repeated, softer but with an edge that permitted no argument. She retreated, leaving the door slightly open. Abel didn't retrieve his rifle. He simply stood on the porch's top step, waiting, a solitary, immovable force. The 3 Grayson men rode into the yard, horses raising dust. The father, flanked by his 2 brutish sons, halted his mount. "We've come for our property, Abel," the old man sneered, voice thin and cruel. "Send out the woman." Abel's gaze remained steady. "She doesn't belong to you." The younger son dismounted, rope in hand, smug grin on his face. "She is by law and by right. We mean to take her back." He stepped toward the porch. "She remains here," Abel stated, and though low, his voice carried over the rising wind with the finality of a slamming door. The son lunged forward. Abel's response was a blur of speed and brutal efficiency. He descended to meet the man not with fists, but with his entire body. A block of solid force that sent the younger Graysons sprawling into dirt. The father and other brother reached for their weapons but froze as Abel looked up, his eyes now blazing with cold fire they had never witnessed. "Leave," he said, "and never return." It wasn't a threat, it was prophecy. Defeated not by violence but by will far stronger than their malice. They hesitated, then gathered their fallen family member and retreated. Angry shouts swallowed by thunder's first clap. As they galloped away, the heavens opened and cleansing rain began falling. The storm passed as quickly as it arrived, leaving air washed clean and smelling of wet earth and sage. The world seemed brighter, colors more vivid. The tension that had hung over the valley for weeks was gone, washed away with rain. In its wake, anew. Gentler quiet settled between Abel and Lena, peace, born not of avoidance but of confrontation faced and won. Life fell into new rhythm, one of collaboration. She worked alongside him now, initial fragility replaced by quiet, resilient strength. She learned to patch roofing, check fencing, identify herbs growing in the foothills. He, in turn, began softening in small ways, leaving wildflowers on the table mornings or pointing out hawks circling high above the valley. Words remained sparse between them, but they were no longer necessary. Their communication existed in shared tasks, knowing glances, simple comfort of occupying the same space. One afternoon, Abel entered the house to find she had finally completed her project. The broken teacup sat on the kitchen windowsill, painstakingly reassembled. Cracks remained visible, a web of fine dark lines, but it was whole and no longer empty. She had filled it with tiny, vibrant purple flowers growing wild by the creek. Abel stopped and studied it for a long time. He reached out and gently touched one petal, his calloused finger contrasting starkly with its delicate texture. He looked at Lena watching from across the room, and for the first time, he smiled. It was a small, slow smile that transformed his stern features, lighting them from within. In that moment, the house was no longer his house, but their home. A quiet promise of a future, pieced together and made beautiful, had finally taken root. Seasons turned, wrapping the small valley in autumn's gold and winter's stark white before yielding again to spring's tender green. Abel and Lena built a life, their story told not in grand declarations, but in steady accumulation of quiet moments. It was a life of shared labor and mutual respect, a silent testament that healing can be found in solid ground beneath one's feet and in another's steady presence. Their sanctuary, won through defiance and built with patient hands, remained untouched by the outside world. They were two solitary souls who, against all odds, found a way to grow together like two trees whose roots had intertwined deep beneath the soil, drawing strength from one another. Their pasts weren't forgotten, but no longer defined their present. Scars remained, like delicate lines on the mended teacup, reminders not of breaking, but of the strength required to become whole again. On a clear spring morning, as they stood together on the porch watching sunrise, over the eastern ridge, the same ridge where threat had once appeared, profound peace settled over them. They had built more than a ranch. They had built a world. I'm curious about your thoughts while experiencing this story. Perhaps you focused on the injustice, the cruelty humans can inflict. Or maybe you were drawn to the quiet strength of someone like a blah person, who doesn't need volume to be heard, whose power lies in his convictions. We encounter so much noise in our world, so much bluster and posturing, that it's easy to forget what genuine strength resembles. It isn't loud. It's the steadfastness of mountains. It's the quiet integrity of someone who does right simply because it is, right? And what of Hertha, woman who lost everything, left with nothing but shame? Her journey back wasn't loud either, was it? It happened through small, quiet acts, tending gardens, mending clothing, holding light steady in storms. Have you noticed how life's biggest changes often begin with the smallest, most courageous steps? It reminds us that resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about willingness to reassemble yourself, even when the cracks still show. This story explores the power of quiet kindness and the profound courage required to both offer and accept it. We share stories like this because they connect with a deep, simple truth, even in the harshest landscapes. Sanctuary can be built, and life can be reborn. If this tale of quiet strength and redemption spoke to you, there's another I think you'll want to experience. It's about someone who lost his way and found his purpose by listening to the wild's whispers. Click here on your screen to watch it now.